Welcome to the Irish Pagan School podcast. Your hosts are authors and co-founders of the Irish Pagan School here in County Waterford, Ireland, Laura O'Brien and Jon O'Sullivan. Fáilte.
What is the Dagda's name? Well, Dagda Agus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome. It is Jon O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School. And ni answer, not hard to say. We have very clear information about the Dagda's name. Names multiple names because the Dagda has multiple names on him, and all of those names give us insights and perspective into who and how he is. So it's not just a case of he has the one name known as the Dagda, but even the name, the Dagda, is it a name or is it something that is on him as a descriptor of who and how he is? So, yeah, neat answer, not hard to say. We have a lot of information about his names, but quite interestingly complex as we explore the Dagda's names. So the first is, of course, the Dagda. The Dagda is translated as the goodly one or the goodly god. Now that's not because he's morally good or like, right and wrong. He does become king in Ireland, and judgment and justice, fair justice, are very much in his wheelhouse. But it's a good god because he's good at it. He's good at everything. And when we see this on the run up to the second battle of Moytura, when there's the meeting of the men and the goddess, all of the heroes, champions, druids, sorcerers, cupbearers, Dean Hecht, Gwivnu, Nuada, everyone is there offering what services they're going to give to prevent or to overcome the Fomorians who are about to invade. After everyone's made the promises, Dagda says, yeah, listen, everything you've promised, I'll take on board myself and see it done. No one disagrees with him. No one hesitates for a second. And then Nuada says, well, obviously because you are the Dagda, you are the goodly god, because you're good at everything. But that is the name that is on him from thence, hence is what the story says. But there are other names. He's also known as Eochaid. Eochaid is a common enough name because there are many Eochaids in the Irish mythology. In fact, one of the kings of the Fir Bullock was actually an Eochaid as well. And before there was Bress, the beautiful, who took over from Nuada as king in Ireland, there was also a different Bress known as Eochaid Bress. So Oakid was a fairly common name, but that translation associates with kind of horses, interestingly enough. It's like horse lord or stallion in a way. So there was a lot of people, oddly enough, referred to by this name Oakid. But again, this is where we step away from actual names and move more into titular epithets or things that he is known as. And here's where we see more about the Dagda from the names that are upon him, because there's the Olathair. Olathair is not all father. It is not the father of all the gods who gave birth to all the gods and all that. No, absolutely not. Olathair is great or ample father. So essentially, it is a recognition of him and the way he is a father to his children, both his biological children and his foster children. So he is a great or ample father. Essentially, he's Big Daddy. So I'm quite fond of the Olathair, and as a pagan person exploring my relationship with this deity, there is a fairly fatherly energy that comes about the communications at times and the long-suffering patience I put him through. Another name that is on him is a more in line with his druidic work, maybe. It is Ruadh Rofhessa, which is the red one of great knowledge. Now, Ruadh is red, but it's red hair. It's not red as in the color red, because that is the Doch Jarag, or the color red is Doch Jarag Oscuelga. Whereas Ruadh is another form of red, but it is more of this auburn or hair kind of color red. And then Rofhessa is great knowledge or great wisdom. So he is this red one of great insight, great wisdom, and great intellect. The most interesting part about the Dagda's many names comes from the second battle of Moytura. So we have the meeting of the men of the goddess when Nuada refers to him as Dagda. Now, before that, he was probably known as Dagda as well, but that's almost a reaffirming of the titular nature of him as Dagda. From there, we then move into later on in that story, we have the Fomorian invasion. And Dagda goes in the guise of like a dumbed down approach to try and suss out what's happening with the invasion, maybe try and prevent it before it kicks off. And he comes a cropper against a guy called Indech. Indech the Downen is one of the kings or warlords of the invading Fomorian host. And Indech kind of puts the Dagda through a number of different terrible circumstances in order to cause the Dagda enough insult obliquely so that the Dagda would react in such a way that it would justify the Fomorian invasion, is my personal reading of that segment. Otherwise, why would the Dagda put up with the abuses that are heaped upon him? If you want to know more about my view on that story, I'll shoot me in the comments, and I will probably do an entire episode where I talk about that. Because time and again, we see the Dagda sacrifice himself in that narrative, from sacrificing his pride, from sacrificing his body. He ends up like eating a whole load of food and becoming this bloated, distended person. And this is where things go further because he leaves the camp having not caused enough offense for Indech to justify his war. But it's not over. Indech has laid a trap for him, and that trap is in the form of Indech's daughter. Now, this woman is known only as Indech's daughter in the narrative. She's not even given her own fucking name, which is terrible, but also shows that the perspective of what's happening here. She's functioning as an extension of her father's will, because if the Dagda causes her offense, she can go back to her dad and say, he caused offense to me, and again, it justifies the invasion. But at this point, she accosts the Dagda on the road. He is distended and bloated from eating a whole trench full of porridge because he couldn't deny it he couldn't cause insult by denying the food that was given him. And she demands that he carry her on his back. And he's like, listen, I'm bloated. I'm unable to do that, unless you help me, get this food out of me. And so she physically accosts him. She literally kicks the shit out of him. Like he voids himself, he vomits all over the place, and he purges his body of it. At which point she's like, "Well, you have to carry me now." And he's like, "Well, no, I really can't. Like I'm not fit for that." And so she makes him strip naked. He then cleans himself off with his own shirt. And she's like, "Well, you have to carry me now." And he's like, "Well, I have an obligation. I can't carry someone unless they know my name." And so this is where we have this function within the story of she asks him 3 times, and on the third time he's kind of compelled to give his name. But it's not just a simple name, and this is where we get into the additional epithets of the Dagda, which is very, very fascinating because it forms a structure of the story known as a rosk or roskada. Rosk is a particular form of poetic expression that can be dated back to the oldest forms of Irish. A Rosk poem is a number of interlinked terms or words that connect to each other, but then each word, as they flow in this particular rhyme and meter, change and alter based on what word comes afterwards. It's not just a case of, well, here's where I read this poetry and I understand everything. It is this flowing, multi-layered, detailed expression, and this is how the Dagda gives his name. Now, I have my pronunciations of it. Actually, Laura, my partner, has done a pronunciation of it as well, and I'll probably link that down below. But I'll read this out for you, and maybe you can get an idea of the flow of this Rosk. So, Indech's daughter brutalizes the Dagda and then demands he give up his name. And he says, Fair ben, Bruch, Brogol, Bromige, Kerbod, Cock, Rollag, Bollag, Lower, Kirk, Dibrig, Olathair, Boath, Athkin, Bethfi, Brigtier, Tree Carboyd, Roth, Rimri, Rieg, Scottby, Olathby, Othby, Olathby. So this is what he says. That's his response. And it's not just a case of tell me your name. This is a full flowing form that hopefully I did it some justice as you hear it. But each of these words then has a meaning by translation, but then the meaning of the words change based on the next word in the sentence. Like the first is fair. Fair is the Irish word for man. So that's pretty much easily done. But then it's fair ben. And ben is a mountain or a peak or a horn or an antler. So suddenly we have fair ben, which is peaked man, horned man, antlered man, man of the peaks, man of the mountains. But then we get into Broch, and Broch then changes Ben because it's not just a singular peak or it's not just one particular like mountain. It's a collection. It's an arrangement of. It is a rack of antlers or a rack of horns. So all of these words kind of change as they interlink with each other. I don't have a full translation of it. In fact, Isolde Carmody did a great translation of this particular Roscada. I might see if I can find a link to that down below. I'll put it in as well because it's great to see the flow of how those words change and how the understanding of those words change as the Dagda doesn't just give his name, he gives something that describes him in so many multi-layered ways that it is both awesome to see, but also confusing to understand, and the depth that you can get just by exploring these simple few words in this Grosk poem. And the way he presents that actually being placed to the three questions to give his identity. Because what happens following the story, once he is given the names, he then picks up Index's daughter and carries her on his back around wherever she wants him to go, all the while being gentle with her, not hurting her, not harming her, giving absolutely no bruises, no insults that she can go back to her father and justify the invasion. It then gets to the point mimicking an earlier part of the narrative between the consensual relationship of the Dagda and the Morrigan meeting at the Ford of Unshin and coupling there. There is this other section of the narrative where they reach a ford and Index's daughter demands sexual relations from the Dagda, and so she she takes him in the fort, and again he can't deny her because he's under an obligation. He can't harm her, he can't hurt her. All of this is set up to try and justify Fomorian invasion through Index's daughter. What happens at the end of that though is the Dagda doesn't fall for the trap. Instead, Index's daughter, after coupling with the Dagda in the ford, you know, realizes that this man is different. There's something about him. Like he has not hurt her, he's not raised his voice at her, he's not done anything in any way to insult or harm her, despite the fact that she's done a shitload of terrible things to him. And what we see at the end of that story is her saying, "You can't win the invasion that's coming, like the Fomorian war host that's coming. You can't win this." And he's like, "I'm gonna fight anyway." And she says, "Well, I will be, a rock in every pathway that you walk." And he's like, "Well, every rock in Ireland will have my footprint on it then." And she's like, "I'll be a tree in every kind of like in every way. I'll be a tree growing in every way to disrupt your progress." And he's like, "Well, every tree will bear the mark of my axe then." And she's like, "You can't win." And he's like, "I still have to try." And in that realization of who he has been, how he has treated her despite the abuses, she says, "Well, when that battle comes, I'll actually be on your side." And so when the days of war come with the Fomorian invasion, the crescendo of the second battle of Moytura, Index's daughter joins with the other sorceresses of the Tuatha Dé Danann to rain fire from the skies to try and prevent a loss for the Tuatha Dé Danann people. But you might say, well, obviously the Dagda won her over, all of that, but it's not even that. I okay, sorry, I'm getting out of the Dagda's names and into a different kind of story, but the understanding the nature of who and how he is, the understanding of like him through the narratives of the stories gives us one view of him. But much like in other stories where he talks about his authority over sun and moon and land and sea, like listing out the power he has authority over, in this central part of the narrative, we have this Roscada poem where he describes himself in this multiple layers through this very recognized form of Irish poetic expression. And I've been studying it for years now, and I still find more information whenever I go back to it. So, yes, the Dagda's names of the Dagda. Is it easy? Ni answer, not hard to say. Yes, we can say that the Dagda has many names. Can we clarify exactly what all of them mean and give you a detailed translation of all of them? No, because they're quite complex, and maybe part of the journey of getting to know the Dagda is exploring this for yourself and doing the deeper work on it. So, thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. We have a year's worth of free resources available for you. Go to irishpagan.school/free. There's an entire free class on the Dagda Dare, Domestic Deity and Hearth Hero, taught by myself if you're interested. I have many other classes specifically on the god that I work for, which is the Dagda, in the Irish Pagan School as well. And until next time, look after yourself. Agus Slán. Goodbye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a positive review in your podcast listener. Then head over to Irish Pagan School and enroll in one of our free or paid courses. Slán go fóill, and we will see you next time.